Okay, so just for the recording, today you have got myself, Dr. Lucy Hunn, and my colleague here, Anna Mulvey, and we are going to be taking you through this workshop today. Okay, so a bit of an overview of what we're going to be covering in the workshop. So within today's workshop, we're going to begin by thinking about resilience, and we're aware that some people can find that word quite tricky and often feel like it's used inappropriately. So we want to be really clear from the start about how we're using this word within this concept, within this context. So when we're thinking about resilience today, we're thinking about how we can upskill and support our young people to manage with the changes and transitions that they experience in life. So we're not placing responsibility and onus on the child to cope in situations that are not kind of appropriate for them. But actually we were thinking about how can we empower our children to cope with those difficulties that come their way. We've reflected with some peers on how within a neurodivergent context, some parents have found this word really difficult. And so we want to just reflect here that this is a workshop which may feel more appropriate for supporting a neurotypical child. As I highlighted before, we have got a series of workshops around neurodiversity. So we'd like to just highlight them. And again, there'll be links at the end of this workshop to that programme, because perhaps they might be more appropriate. So we're going to quickly think about what we mean by resilience. Then we're going to look at thinking about how the 5 steps to well-being can kind of help us build resilience, and what we can do to be kind of promoting well-being for our young people. And then we're going to think about transitions and change, and think about how we can practically support our young people to manage their next steps. Okay, so what do we mean by resilience here today? So today we're thinking about the ability to manage and continue to move forward in the face of challenging situations. So it's not about kind of not having emotions, it's not about not feeling kind of normal emotions, but learning how to keep going or keep focused on the direction that we want to go in. So resilience is not about kind of putting up with or accepting unhelpful environments or situations. And it's not something that can be just switched on. It's everyone's responsibility to think about how we can nurture resilience within our children. And the reason we're thinking about kind of resilience today is by building resilience, we can buffer the challenges that we come across in life. So something we're going to think more about today is how resilience is helpful in the face of a challenge or a change or transition. So if you just kind of stop to think for a moment about your current stresses in your life, it's really normal that we might all kind of feel that scared or frightened feeling in the face of something really stressful. And the same is really true for our young people. We're not suggesting that being resilient is kind of not experiencing those emotions associated with stress, because we'll all experience those difficult emotions associated with stress. But what we're considering here today is about how resilience can help us still feel those emotions and experiences, but not let them stop us from living a meaningful life and moving in the direction that we want to be moving in. And what we know is that there's a correlation between resilience and well-being. So to have well-being, you must have resilience. And Rick Hanson, a psychologist from America, has spent a lot of time looking at what do we need as humans with regards to well-being. How does this relate to resilience? And although some people find this much easier to do than others, because it's not something kind of we're naturally born with, it's something that can be nurtured and grown over time. Our brains change throughout our experiences, depending on what we're exposed to. And what this essentially means is that with the right experiences, we can support people to build resilience. And I guess it's just worth noting here that children are often much more resilient than what we give them credit for. So although you may be kind of wondering whether your child needs more resilience, do think about how your child has shown resilience already throughout their life. Because it's very likely that in the face of life's challenges, your child has already demonstrated the ability to be resilient. So I guess just before we move on to think about the 5 ways to well-being and how these connect to resilience, it's really important to think about temperament and individual differences. So whilst resilience is not something that we're kind of born with, it's important to take account of temperaments. So when we're thinking about this, we're thinking about what do you notice about your child and how they respond to challenges? If you've got a couple of children or maybe more, it might be really interesting to think about, well, what are the differences in how they kind of respond to life's challenges. Every child will start from a different place. And when we think about building resilience, we're thinking about how we can grow and nurture this resilience. So Dr. Bruce Perry, an American psychiatrist, talks about how we're all born with different temperaments. Some children can experience kind of moderate challenges and get back to their kind of baseline really easily. Whereas for other children, they can only tolerate small doses of challenge, and it might take them much longer to get back to their baseline. And that's okay. We're all different and we've all got different temperaments. What's important is that we take the lead from our children as much as possible. They will show us how much is too much. And we are as parents, you're the people that are kind of best placed to know them best. So how much we challenge them and how much support they need when facing those challenges will be about your intuition in terms of what your child needs. Okay, so the 5 ways to wellbeing and resilience. So the 5 ways to wellbeing is something recognised by the NHS as a means of supporting our overall wellbeing, both for children and adults. We know that looking after our well-being is a way of building our resilience by creating a foundation in both mind and body that enables us to face challenges and transitions. If we don't look after our general well-being, we're less likely to be able to manage those difficult changes, and we're going to be less resilient when things come our way that are difficult. So we're going to go through each of the 5 ways to well-being, think about what they are and how we can support our young people to involve them in their life as a way of building up their resilience. So the first way to well-being is connection. So we know that relationships are the biggest predictor of overall happiness for all of us. As humans, we are hardwired for connection. And when we connect with others, it kind of deactivates that stress response because it signals to the brain that we're safe. So relationships are so key to enabling us to be resilient. We need kind of safe, positive relationships with the people around us to build that resilience. Resilience can't really be built without people around us because we recognise how important connection is. So these relationships might look really different for different young people. It could be with their parents, it could be grandparents, it might be with their peers or their uncles or aunts, or perhaps they've got a coach as part of an extracurricular activity that they engage with that's a really important person for them. So it's worth just taking a moment to think about who are the important people in your child's life. If young people can have at least one consistent and supportive relationship, they're much better able to manage life's ups and downs. And it's within those relationships that we develop core strength. We learn and develop around flexibility, and the relationships around us, those people that we're close to, are so important for us. So that ongoing presence of having that supportive relationship really impacts our future. It puts the brakes on stress response that we'll go through. So it's really important that we create opportunities for our children to develop relationships. That might be with ourselves, spending extra time with them, thinking about how we can build that relationship, or it might be encouraging relationships with peers. It might be supporting them to go to clubs so they can develop relationships there. It might be thinking about school. Who is there at school that they've got that they can connect with, whether that's peers or adults at school? Or thinking about in your family. Where are the people in your family and extended family that your young person or child feels like they can build a strong relationship with? And when we've got coming alongside there on the slide, and kind of what we mean by this is sitting with your young person, letting them know that you're there, that you're available for them, listening to them, validating those difficult feelings and experiences, not trying to fix things for them because we can't always fix, but just being there with them, showing warmth and empathy and positive regard. So really think about your relationship with your child and the key relationships they have with others as a way of thinking about how we can build their resilience. Okay, next we've got being active. So what we know is that moving our bodies is the single most important way to relieve stress in the face of challenging situations. Doesn't matter what you do or how long you do it for, movement and activity really supports our resilience by processing stress in our bodies on a really physiological level. And if you think about children, they're always facing stressors, like stresses at school, what's going on kind of in the school context. Are they having ruptures in their relationships? Are they doing exams or tests? How things might be going at home? So our young people, whilst they might seem like small stresses to us as adults that have more life experience, for them, those stresses are really real and happening quite often. And stresses activate that stress response. So that physiological process that happens in our body, the kind of, you might have heard it being called the fight, flight, or freeze response. So when we encounter stress, that response is activated in our body. And when we can't easily deal with the stress, it hangs around in our body. And we need to find ways to end that stress cycle. And using exercise is one of those ways to deal with those physiological feelings and complete that stress cycle to bring down that hyperarousal. So when we get stressed, we become hyperaroused. Our body's doing all sorts of things to try and help us deal with that stress. And exercise can be one way to bring that stress level down on a really physical level. So whilst it's also doing that, exercise is also supporting the release of kind of positive hormones such as endorphins. So this combination of processing stress hormones and releasing positive hormones really supports with that resilience building. So just take a moment now to think about what that could look like for your child. What could it look like, particularly when they're managing changes and transitions? Is there a sport or activity that they already do that they really enjoy? And how could they do more of this, or how can you prioritize this in times of stress? Or if your child doesn't like any of these things, how can you incorporate movement into their day? So is it dancing in the kitchen, getting out in the garden? You might be going for a walk with others. That might also kind of provide that opportunity to connect with people if it's something with other people. It doesn't have to be for that long, but it just needs to be about getting that activity, getting that movement in so that their body can help process some of that stress hormone. Okay, being present. There is so much value to being present in the moment. And I guess in this day and age, it can be so difficult. We've got so much information coming in. We're processing things all the time on a daily basis. We're often trying to multitask. Children are just managing so much today. I think even just the impact of kind of phones and technology, whilst this offers lots of positives, it also creates that kind of additional challenge of providing constant new information. So messages might be coming in as they're doing a bit of schoolwork, or parents are trying to talk to them as they're also on their gaming. There's just they're often trying to do multiple things at once with different information coming in from different sources. That might also be combined with kind of worrying about the past or worrying about the future. But what we know is that when we're doing lots of things at the same time, we don't always apply ourselves in the best way. And we can spend a lot of time kind of getting caught up in lots of different thoughts. And this isn't always helpful. But being in the here and now means that we're giving our brains a bit of a rest. So if we can increase our focus or attention on one thing, that can have really positive implications for our cognitive abilities and our emotions. We know that this can be really challenging though. Mihaly, who is a psychologist, has noticed that people who have experience of a flow activity, which he describes as being involved in activity in the moment, which you're completely absorbed in, can be really key to happiness. So that complete absorption into an activity that you're doing, or being in the zone, as some people call it, that kind of real focus where you're not aware of other things going on around you, but you're just really concentrating on what you're doing in that moment. That can be really positive in terms of building happiness and resilience. So flow activities, as he describes them, are those that give us kind of a balance between enjoyment and challenge and utilize our strengths. So it helps us down regulate that part of our brain, which is always looking out for threats, and builds up that idea, that sense of achievement, that sense of enjoyment, and allows our brain that kind of psychological rest period whilst we're in that flow time. So building in flow time can be a counterweight to those kind of activities that your child finds more challenging. So just going to encourage you here to think about, we've thought about what exercise that they might be able to get involved in. We've thought a little bit about the connections and the relationships in their life that they can build up. So just want you to spend a moment thinking about what activities might create that sense of flow for your young person. Might it be doing some artwork, maybe playing or listening to some music, perhaps building a castle with some magnetiles, or playing a game of football? Think about what your child's strengths are and what they enjoy, and then think about how you can incorporate time for that each day doing those activities. Doesn't we don't want these activities to necessarily take over other activities, but it's just really important that we pay attention to these activities that really help our child to be in the moment, and we don't want them to miss out on these activities. I guess it's also important here to think about how it's important for us to do these things ourselves. So as adults, as parents, we can also think about what are our flow activities? What activities can we be doing to increase our dopamine to be able to support our children? And it might be that it's doing an activity together where if we've got similar interests, you could use that flow activity as a bit of a chance to build relationship and connection whilst also having that kind of flow activity. Okay, so just kind of building on that, just would be helpful to think about what could be a flow activity for your child. Think about what their strengths are, and if you could just use Slido, and we'll share some suggestions for what people think flow activities might be for their children. Writing a poem, yeah, what a lovely example. Yeah, got some creative writers. Yeah, really get into the flow when they're thinking about writing a poem. Building Lego, drawing, crafts, yeah, so more of that kind of that other side of creative things. Perhaps working on a specific Lego project. Some people can get really involved in that, can't they? Painting or colouring, yeah, the focus we can see sometimes when our children are being creative is amazing. Like to have puzzle competitions. What a lovely idea. I suppose that sounds to me like it incorporates that connection by the fact that it's a competition, but also that real kind of concentration on the puzzle. Playing on the trampoline, singing, making her own show. What a lovely idea. Yeah. Jumping on the trampoline by themselves or together with other people, really nice. And there you're almost incorporating all three of the things that we've spoken about so far. There's the physical movement there, the connection with other people, perhaps particularly if the show's being put on for other people, and that flow idea. Scrapbook making, yeah, lovely. Crafting, playing a game together. Yeah, lovely. Some really, really nice suggestions coming through there of what people could do. Gymnastics, yeah. I love how these are bringing together the physical movement, some of them, as well as that flow activity, or other ones are bringing together, playing a card game together, for instance, bringing that connection alongside that flow activity. Really, really nice. Okay, so number 4 of our kind of 5 pillars to well-being is learning. So we know that learning and achievement are fundamental for our well-being. So it's important to give our young people opportunities for learning and success, to show them that they're capable of things. And we know that that can really impact brain changes and development. We know that children have got really got such neuroplasticity. They're kind of making new connections all the time. And the brain continues to develop and change loads in our early life, which means that new information really helps their brains grow. And this, alongside the kind of sense of achievement and accomplishment, is really significant in supporting resilience and our sense of being able to kind of learn and grow and overcome difficulties. We also learn a lot from when things go wrong. We can try and be available for them when things goes wrong, and support them through that. But it's a really important skill for them to learn in terms of how they approach tasks, what they do when things don't go to plan, and how they then problem solve to move forward. So if young people can experience failure with support from those around them, they can then develop those skills for life, where when they hit a hurdle, they don't feel completely lost. They feel like they've been in this situation before, they've encountered a difficulty, they've been able to overcome that with support, and then they've been able to move forward. That's such a positive experience for a young person, even if it's difficult in the moment. However, repeated failure and then not having opportunities for success can be quite a negative experience for young people. So what we want to do is think about activities and opportunities for our young people where they can really succeed. There might be challenges that they have to face along the way. There might be hurdles they have to overcome, but with your support or the support of other important people around them, they're able to succeed at those challenges. So that balance of both kind of tricky learning and challenge is really important and helpful for young brains. And if people know that they can grow their brains with practice, that's really helpful for them to know. So what we kind of think about a growth growth mindset. So we're not born with certain abilities, but we can, when we focus on things, we can put the effort and work towards things. So if you can encourage that mindset with your young people, that's really helpful. So we need to be kind of careful of using the language that we use. So rather than saying kind of, you're so clever, you're so sporty, think about the process and the effort involved. So you were so organized in that assignment. I really noticed how much effort you put into that. So if you put an emphasis when you're talking to your young people on that kind of their effort that they put into things, how meaningfully they engage with something, the process they went through to get there, that will really help support that growth mindset. So it's not always about the outcome, but it's about how the growth that they went through to get there. Sorry, my losing my voice slightly. And we can also remind children of the power of yet. So we can't get there yet, but if you kind of wanted to run a marathon, you wouldn't be able to get up one day and run a marathon the next day. You'd say, oh, I can't run a marathon. But what we can say is you can't run a marathon yet. And that just highlights the potential that young people have. So it's really important to think about our language around learning and thinking about how we can challenge our young people, but not push them outside of their comfort zone, so that they learn that they can have success. They learn that they are good at something. They build up that sense of achievement. And our language around that is really important. We need to, if we can put a focus on kind of the process, the effort, the growth, the kind of not yet, we can support that mindset around being able to grow and develop. Okay, so giving. We also know that for the human race to survive, we're totally dependent on kindness. On kindness, giving, community. If we see or do kind acts, that really promotes this kind of feel-good hormones that we're programmed to do this. There's enormous benefits of kindness, both for the giver, the receiver, and for observers. Kindness really strengthens our relationships and taps into that sense of shared humanity. So when we're thinking about how giving links into well-being, that sense of kind of that joy that it brings us quite naturally when we can see how someone receives a gift, when we perhaps receive that gift ourselves, or even when somebody else observes it, that's really going to support that sense of well-being and build up that resilience. I guess it's really important to recognize that in a kind of our busy and stressful worlds, it's often really hard to kind of stop and think about giving. But kindness and giving kind of often get pushed to the bottom of our pile or the bottom of our to-do list. And we can become really problem focused, particularly when we're under stress. So it's just a reminder that we all can fall into this. This idea that we feel like we haven't got the capacity to be kind and giving. But I just would like to encourage you that and be mindful that it can be so helpful for all different people involved in that situation. So we know in reality, we might not always feel like the house is full of kindness, and it might feel like it's more full of stress or challenges that feel really hard. But if we can demonstrate and model kindness and kind of what kindness looks like, what giving looks like, what a kind act might be, children will really notice this. And they really notice what we do, and they notice what we say, but more so they notice what we do. So if you can demonstrate and model those acts of kindness, that will have an impact on them too. This also includes being kind to ourselves. So self-compassion is a really important thing, and using kind of self-compassion out loud is really important to model to our children. If you can model out loud being kind to yourself, maybe when you make a mistake or you say to yourself, oh, I really didn't mean to do that, but it's okay, I'll learn from this, I'll move on. Maybe I need to take 5 minutes for myself to kind of look after myself in this situation. If you can model that, your children are also going to see that, and they will pick up on that. If we're around kindness, it makes us feel better. It will make you feel better. It will make your young person feel better. So encouraging that sense of giving, that sense of kindness is going to have a positive impact on everybody in the house. And that kind of positive impact will also feed into making us feel more resilient when we face challenges together. Okay, so we've done the 5 pillars of well-being. We've had connection, we've had movement, we've had flow activities, so being in the present. We've had learning, and we've had kindness and giving. So what do you think you could do this summer out of those kind of 5 pillars of well-being, which we know can kind of support our well-being and in doing so support our resilience? What could you engage your child to do more of this summer? Doing a flow activity a day. Yeah, lovely. Being more present. Yeah. So again, that kind of that sense of flow maybe is really important. Exercise, get outside. Yeah. Perhaps doing a little bit. Yes, you're kind of combining that kindness with that kindness with being active and being in the moment. Yeah, great. Got a few more people typing, so I'll just hold on a moment before we move on. Sharing activities, protected times, which guarantees I'm available. Yeah, really prioritizing that sense of connection over the summer. It can be really tricky, can't it, when you're kind of maybe balancing work with the kids being off school. It can be really tricky, but kind of protecting time. And sometimes it might be scheduling that in at kind of Sunday night. You think about where are the opportunities for us throughout the week to have those shared activities, or where are the opportunities throughout the week to make sure exercise happens or to encourage those flow activities. Just going at a slower pace. Yeah, lovely. Having a planned weekly swim session. Yeah, all really nice ideas that all kind of engage in those different elements of well-being. Okay, I'm going to pass over to my colleague now, Anna.
Hi, everybody.
Just sorting out the tech.
Yeah, sorry guys, you can see which one of us knows how to work the tech here. Okay, we're going to move on to think a bit about transitions and managing next steps. I know from sort of the ages you guys said at the start, there's probably a lot of this going on for your young people. So we're going to move on to think about this just because we know that actually managing transition is really closely related to resilience. So we know that putting in those building blocks that we've just been talking about to improve well-being and resilience, that we're setting our children up to be able to better manage and tolerate change and transition. But we also know that actually having the right experiences of transition itself can be really important for building resilience. So we know that children face lots of different transitions in their lives. It could be transitioning from one academic year to another. It could be transitioning into a new period of life. So maybe moving into those teenage years, or maybe even bigger transitions like moving to a whole new school entirely, maybe changes in the family makeup. So we know children are experiencing these transitions all the time. And we know that those transitions are likely to evoke a wide range of emotions. So it might be that some transitions are really exciting and they might make our young people feel really happy. They might even feel relief if it's a change to something that they're quite keen to have a change to. But we also know it might be that transitions are making them feel really anxious or overwhelmed or lost. And I think it's really important to just note that we take the time to listen to our children and make sure that we understand what it is that makes the transition feel difficult for them. So really focusing on giving them the time and space to talk about how they're feeling and really validate that, again, being really present in that moment. And we are going to send out an activity worksheet after the workshop that has a really helpful activity on it where it talks about what changes are happening, what's staying the same, and that can be really helpful to work out actually what's causing maybe some anxiety for your young person around transitions. I guess just further on that, we know that change, even when it's change that we might really want and that's welcomed, it can still be hard. So we know that change and worries about change are really natural to just being a human being, not just for our children, but for us as well. So it can be really helpful to normalise some of your young person's worries and just really emphasise that they're not alone in that. Everybody finds change challenging and that you're there to support them through that change. But just to really emphasise that actually as human beings, it's really natural that we want to know what's happening in the future. And we can often crave that sense of familiarity and predictability. So therefore, when change comes about, that uncertainty can be really difficult, and just really validating that actually that is completely normal, and just sitting in that moment with them and trying to support them with that. And I guess on that note, we know that actually change is going to appear across lifespan, not just in our young people's childhood. So learning to tolerate that uncertainty and manage transition is a really important life skill that our young people, if they're supported to do that, can sort of take throughout life with them. So just popping back onto Slido, just to have a bit of a think about actually what has been your own experience of transition in a few words, sort of linking into that idea that actually we know transition is a part of just being human, not just for our young people. See people typing away. Stressful, yeah, absolutely. Generates anxiety, which can be reduced by visualization and pre-planning. Brilliant. So I guess there's that real acknowledgement that actually change and transitions are really hard, and even as adults we find them really difficult. And I think that can be a really validating message to give our young people, so they feel less alone in that. Triggers anxiety between home and school and has filtered into other areas of her life. Yeah, absolutely. And that's what we know, is that actually when we've got these big changes going on, it's really helpful for us to find ways to manage that and support with that, because it can affect sort of other areas of life, not just the area that the change is happening in. Having to find new support in transitions, absolutely. It's definitely a time for all of us where that connection and support from others is really, really key. Okay. Going to move on. And just a second question then, what kind of transitions is your child or children currently facing? So I guess I'm wondering, with the sort of age groups that you shared with us earlier, whether there's stuff with school maybe going on, especially around that sort of moving into teenage years, moving up to high school. Yeah, moving to secondary school. Absolutely. And that's a massive transition if they've, sort of spent many years in their primary schools, moving to a new environment. Yeah, moving into year one, which you've heard is a bit of a leap, absolutely. So sort of maybe there's some anxiety there for you as well about that transition. Okay, yeah, and also thinking about loss and how that can also impact sort of that feeling of change. Okay, yeah. So I think it's really helpful just to sort of have those examples and start to maybe mentalize what's going on for your young people, but also maybe a bit reassuring that actually it sounds like there's a bit of a theme for different people about changes for their young people at the moment. Okay, so we're going to think a bit about openness and flexibility. So I suppose this feels really important when we're thinking about resilience and managing change, because we know that it's a skill that our young people are very much still learning, and actually openness and flexibility is especially difficult for younger children. But we know that it's a really key skill that we need to cope with sort of challenges in life. We know that if we're really inflexible, that it might mean that we're reacting in a way that might be quite rigid. We might not sort of be able to adapt to changes. We might not be able to adapt to the current circumstances of our life. And often it might mean, if we're being quite rigid, that we're stuck in old ways of doing things, even if those ways of doing things aren't getting us what we want. So there might be sort of negative consequences of being quite rigid. And we also know that actually an inflexible mindset might not only include outward sort of rigidity, but can also be quite unhelpful when we think about if we're being quite rigid in how we're feeling internally. So it might be that our young people might be trying to sort of resist and be quite rigid against feeling certain things. And that actually can come at quite a price. So it might be that if we're really resistant to feeling a certain thing, I shouldn't be feeling this way. I don't want to do that. I don't want to feel this way. It can get us quite stuck. And I wonder if you can think of any times where maybe that applies to your young person, you know, that real rigid, I'm not doing that, I don't want to try that, I shouldn't feel like this, you can't make me do that. And I guess why we're talking about this is because really we want to help build flexibility and openness to experiences when we're thinking about this transition and changes that we know are going to come with life. And if we can start that kind of process with raising awareness and noticing maybe when our young people are caught up in those patterns of really reacting with that kind of rigid mindset, then we can kind of look at with our young people what our options are. So rather than feeling kind of stuck with being in that way, we can think about new possibilities of how we could react. So that might be slowing down with your young person, sort of pausing, and really thinking about what's going on for your young person. And I think especially with sort of younger children, our young people are going to need help with that, sort of trying to slow down and work out what's going on there, because, you know, it's especially difficult for young people. And I suppose just a bit more on that. So you can support your young person with this kind of by allowing them to be really curious about what's going on for them, what's going on in those experiences where they're feeling that need to be really like rigid. And rather than really encouraging them to try and get rid of that or push that away, really encourage them to sort of explore what they're feeling. Almost like thinking about it like it's a feeling they've never felt before. So being really curious and asking them about it and trying to help them explore that. And this can really help them sort of notice what thoughts are coming up in a really curious way, rather than almost like judging their thoughts when they come up. Because we can quite commonly fall into, as adults as well, sort of defining a feeling or certain emotions as bad emotions or good emotions. So like emotions that shouldn't be there and emotions that should be there. But instead of almost judging them, we can look at them without judgment and just notice it as an emotion, and sort of thinking that these emotions and sort of inner feelings and experiences might come and go. But often what can bring a lot of that difficulty is that we're really judging them and we're trying our best to avoid them, which probably means that actually they're just going to keep coming back. And in the long run, they're going to sort of cause more issues. So one way holding that in mind to improve those skills of kind of like openness and flexibility is to be able, again, going back to that idea of the present moment. So really paying attention to the present moment in a non-judgmental way. So when we're engaged in the present moment, then we can really engage in what we're doing in the here and now. And we've already mentioned that in the sort of 5 ways to well-being and flow activities. So I guess the real message there is just being really curious, supporting our young people to be curious about why there might be some of that rigidity coming up and that not wanting to feel things or not wanting to do things. Okay. So just moving on to think about actually how do we start to think about tolerating uncertainty? So we know that we're going to face uncertainty throughout life. It's not specific to childhood, that is throughout life. And actually, therefore, learning to tolerate some of that uncertainty from a young age is a really important skill. And we know that with transitions, that's a really big thing, is that uncertainty that we spoke about earlier. But as we kind of mentioned earlier, we know we all have a natural need for some certainty. So we're human beings, we can naturally feel more safe or comfortable if we know exactly what's lying ahead. So it's really common that we feel quite stressed in the face of uncertainty. So moving forward, it might be sort of helpful to try and notice with your young person times when uncertainty was actually really great and really embraced. So maybe a previous transition that went really well, or a situation that they knew was uncertain. Maybe they didn't know exactly what was going to happen, but it was quite exciting, maybe like a surprise. And this can be down to even small things, whether it was that they were going to watch a film and they had no idea what was going to be the ending of that film, but they actually really enjoyed it and they had a great time. Or it could be something a bit more serious, like a transition to a new school year and they actually had a really nice year. So just really trying to bring in some of those examples where uncertainty was actually really good. Because we know that although we don't naturally want that uncertainty, it really offers us lots of benefits as well. Because if we think about how sort of boring life would be if everything was certain, if we knew every eventuality, we knew exactly what was going to happen every day, it would be quite tedious. So really linking in with those positives about uncertainties and the opportunities that uncertainty brings. And I guess if the uncertainties feel quite large or overwhelming, it can be really helpful to try and focus on what is in your young person's control or maybe what is more certain. So, for example, with transitions with school, what do we actually know about that transition? What can you do to prepare for that transition? Is it knowing who's going to be there, who from primary school is moving up to high school? What shoes will you be wearing? How will you, what bag will you be bringing? So sometimes in those really big uncertainty challenges, it can be really helpful to focus on what is in control as well. Okay. And just another idea here about actually, so thinking about how we can create opportunities for overcoming that anxiety around uncertainty. So one of the things that we can do is actually create opportunities for uncertainty in small ways during the summer holidays. So in really small, safe ways, which then support your young person to try these things and be able to reflect afterwards on the experience. And be able to think, actually, how did that go? Did I enjoy it? Was there anything that was difficult that came up? How did I manage that? And can be really helpful for them to build coping sort of statements around how they managed. So if you kind of maybe try starting with small elements of uncertainty that you're confident that your young person will be able to overcome, you can then almost work to build this up. And in doing so, building up, there's that sense of being able to tolerate elements of uncertainty. They get to have those experiences where they might have felt anxious about change or uncertainty, but actually they managed it and they got through that, and give them that real sense of being able to believe in themselves. And it might be things like a new activity, it might be trying a new food, a new environment, just whatever sort of feels manageable for your young person and can sort of work up to a higher level. And it might also be helpful to use these questions that we've popped on the slide here, just about thinking about reflecting on how they managed during it, how they felt during it, and actually what helped them cope in that moment. Okay. So a few of you sort of mentioned on the Slidos about thinking about specific transitions around school. And that's something that we hear quite a lot. So we've popped on thinking about practical preparations for this transition. So it might look different for different children and different transitions, but these are some sort of general ideas we've popped on. So again, almost a bit like that, tolerating uncertainty, trying to provide your young person with maybe a sense of a timeline, so about what's going to happen. So this can be almost having it planned out, some warnings about when change is going to be happening. It might be leading up to that point of change in that timeline. There's a bit of preparation, sort of saying, this is happening next week. But largely just that preparation can be really helpful, and it may just be information about what school's going to look like, what the day-to-day, or just it might be leading up in the school holidays, what that transition will look like. And also just to say, we know every child is different, so it might be that some children would really benefit from a bit of a timeline or a bit of a plan in sort of like verbal format, or it might be using images if that's helpful. And also just providing an opportunity to ask questions or come back as they're processing this information about the transition. creating spaces to really address if anything comes up about their understanding about what's happening, give them a chance to ask any questions they have about things where they might be confused about something. And also, just at the end here, we've popped on an opportunity to say goodbye or acknowledge losses. And I guess what we're really referencing there is that actually, even if we're really happy about a transition, it can be really nice to have an opportunity to kind of name any losses that they might be feeling or feel sad about. And the idea there is that we're not trying to fix that, we're not trying to sort of push that away, but just really acknowledging actually that it's okay to feel sad about changes, and we don't have to fix everything, but we can just sit alongside them and say, I can see why you might be feeling sad about that, or why you might be sad that that's sort of finished now. So just also offering that opportunity to sit in those feelings rather than trying to sort of almost like fix everything. Okay. So just moving on, so thinking about actually how do we create opportunities for growing confidence. So we've kind of just touched on this slightly, but we're just going to reference specifically this idea about encouraging a gradual exposure and increasing that familiarity to elements of change. So when we talk about graded exposure, we just are referring to the idea of slowly introducing aspects of new situations or change, so that over time, as that familiarity is increasing, uncertainty decreases, and it helps to kind of that feel more comfortable and helps practically to see the change. So that might be thinking about, is there things like induction days that can be done, or spending time in the area, even if it's just walking around sort of the area that new school might be, or any new environment that's going to be a change to their routine. And we know that actually the summer holidays can be an opportunity to really help prepare for that. So this could be done in a fun way, with sort of like motivators if that's appropriate. So maybe giving your young person a choice of a few options, maybe trying some new things around that. So it could be travelling by bus for practice if that's how they're getting to school. It could be visiting new areas around the school, and also maybe thinking about things like building more confidence in being independent. So is that sorting their lunch, almost practicing as if they're going to be going to school the next day? If it's not related to school, we're just thinking about more transitions generally. Maybe it's if you're popping to town, having the confidence to sort of try and go up and ask a question to a store assistant. But I guess the idea here is, regardless of what the change is or the environment, it's just about creating small steps to give them that opportunity of feeling sort of more confident in those changes that are happening. And just to say here, we have some resources that we've popped on, so that can help with this idea of supporting with transition and building that resilience around that. So we've popped on about a communication passport. So a communication passport is essentially just a little book that helps to convey important information about your young person, and they can be used as almost like a communication tool. It can start a conversation about your young person, so that they can really communicate the important things about themselves. It can also be used if that's too difficult to communicate those things without having to have a conversation. But it's really a document that kind of captures all the important information about a person on a single sheet of paper. So it can be really helpful, especially if communication might be something that sort of causes anxiety or can be quite tricky. And it also reduces that having to repeat sort of their story or information about themselves. We've also popped on about transition booklets, so that will be sent out with the resources. It provides sort of a variety of activities you can do with your young person to think about transitions that are happening for them and what can support with that. And also we've just got a resource coming that I think was mentioned before about what will stay the same and what will change, just to give them that really helpful clear plan about transitions and thinking about supporting with that. Okay, so thinking about adapting to change. So just feeding on from what we've already spoken about, really. So it can be really helpful in those times of a lot of change and transitions to keep a usual routine so that not everything is changing. If there's lots of new stuff to learn, helping them learn this and giving them permission to take time to adapt. We know change can be really exhausting, so it might be creating some memory aids for new information that's coming on, but also just giving permission to have time for rest. We know that periods of change can be really exhausting, so it can be really helpful to allow them that time and just even verbally give permission for that. And also seeing and encouraging seeing the new opportunities that come with change that we've already discussed. Increasing that sense of responsibility that we've spoken about and ownership. So those things like packing their own lunchbox, helping them have a bit more onus over things, even if it's something as simple as, I don't know, changing something in their room or being the person to take a lead on asking for something in a shop. And really importantly at the end, which I don't think we've spoken about as much, but is equally as important, is really acknowledging brave behaviour. We know that times of change can be really, really difficult. So really acknowledging and praising the efforts that they're making and really encouraging them to recognise that in themselves as well. Okay, so just popping back onto Slido. So just thinking about what has helped you as a parent adapt to change or transitions, just because it can be a really nice thing to share those with each other. Yeah, being given enough time to process any change, absolutely. And I think that's a really nice one to think about with our young people, because we want to help so much that we might come in and want to immediately fix things, but actually just allowing that time can be really good. Talking through with a safe person, yeah. And maybe even naming who that person is when things aren't really heightened and difficult, so they know exactly who they're going to. Yeah, preparing, planning time to accept changes, absolutely. Writing things down so it's out of your head, yeah, brilliant. Building up skills to prepare, absolutely. And I guess that kind of touches on hopefully what we've been trying to do today. Brilliant. Okay. Sure. Great. Okay. Perfect. Brilliant. Thanks, guys. And hopefully some of those bits that are being shared there can be helpful for ideas as well.
Yeah. Okay, that kind of brings us towards the end of the workshop. We've just got some resources and kind of links here at the end, so stay tuned to see what we've got, but equally this will all be sent out to you with the slide deck that's going to come out in kind of the next week or so. So we've got some other all our other workshops are online. So I think we haven't really talked that much about anxiety today, but obviously it might be that kind of anxiety is something that your young person is struggling with in the kind of thinking about transitions and resilience being tricky. So we have got some workshops on resilience that we do within our team, which are all, you can either sign up to ones that are coming up, or you can view kind of our recordings online. The strength switch. So this is about how the new science of strength-based parenting can help your child and your teen to flourish. So that's a book, but I think that this is a SoundCloud. I think that's a podcast episode, which kind of talks about the book and what's in that book. And then again, there's another kind of audio book / YouTube extract around raising happy and successful teens in an age of anxiety and distraction. So they kind of both link into what we've been talking about today. And then we've got Russ Harris's book on there about Act Made Simple, and he very much ACT is acceptance and commitment therapy, and it's very much thinking about increasing that kind of cognitive flexibility, and speaks to a lot of kind of how we manage in the face of difficulties. So there's some kind of resources that might be useful around kind of building resilience. And then we've got some transition stuff here. So Anna already mentioned that transitions guide. It's brilliant. I've looked through it, and there's so many useful bits. You can kind of pick out which bits you think might be helpful and which might not be so helpful for your young person, but that will get sent round. Copies of these will be sent round, but there's also the links there. And there's also, I guess we just highlight the resource of Sendias within Suffolk. So they're really helpful when thinking about kind of school transitions specifically. They've got a lot of resources on their website, including lots of little YouTube shorts and things like that. So they've also got some things specifically around transitions when thinking about school, and all of their work is can be accessed for free. Oh, what's happened there? One second, I'm not quite sure why we've lost my slides and my mouse. Bear with me one moment whilst I try and work out how I... Let's go to here. We seem to be struggling with Slido. So let me skip through the Slido slides and see if the other ones work. Okay, yeah, it seems to be that our Slido is not working anymore. But so there's some more key resources here. So if you are really worried about your young person and their mental health, there's some kind of helplines here. Papyrus is a brilliant resource. And again, we've got the kind of one of the psychology in schools parent workshops around understanding self-harm in children. And there's some other links there to Mind. Again, that QR code that I said would come up again about the neurodiversity program that we've got, and all our other workshops that you can access. And then just to highlight the Recovery College. So the Recovery College is a great resource. It's a kind of a mix of professionals and non-professionals all learning together around a variety of different topics. And it can be really helpful. There's different ones are online, some are in person. And there's a really nice one around for 16 to 25-year-olds kind of thinking about themselves and their self-care and what that looks like for them and what that means within their future. So there's some lovely different courses on there that I'd recommend that you take a look at. And that brings us to the end of our presentation today. I'm just going to quickly see if I can get up those final Slidos, because it would be really helpful if we can get a idea of how the work, some feedback. They were feedback Slidos. So see if we can get an idea of, if I can go backwards, but it's not going to work. Yeah, there were just some feedback on how you found I'll stop sharing, on how you found today's workshop, anything that you think would be helpful for you to kind of take away and think about further with your child. So whether that's something from the 5 pillars of the wellbeing, or whether that's more around those kind of strategies around managing transitions and next steps. And then also some feedback on what wasn't so helpful within the workshop. So when you get sent the resources, there is a feedback survey within that. So we would really appreciate you taking kind of a couple of minutes to give us some feedback, because we really do make changes each time on our workshops based on the feedback that we get. So apologies that we haven't been able to do that, but I'd also encourage you to give feedback using that feedback link when you do get sent out the resources. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today and interacting with us on Slido. We hope that today's been helpful for you in kind of thinking about your knowledge around resilience and some strategies for supporting your young person.